another rowing chat. This week I am joined by Annamarie Phelps. Welcome.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Now, please introduce yourself to the listeners. What is it that you do nowadays? What's your job?
Okay, well, I am the chairman of British Rowing, which is the national federation for rowing for Great Britain and for all the clubs in England. I'm spent quite a lot of time in my youth, as you all know, Rebecca, rowing first of all at Cambridge and then at some other clubs in London on the Tideway, ending up at Thames Rowing Club, and rowed in the national team during the 90s as a lightweight, and then went to the Olympic Games in Atlanta in '96 in the bow seat of the 8.
And now you're a chairman. How does that come about?
Well, when I came back from Atlanta, our then chairman, Di Ellis, gave me a little tap on the shoulder, and I think I'd been quite involved in the sort of politics of rowing all the way through. I was always an athlete representative or working on some committee, and Di asked me would I chair the Women's Rowing Commission back in '96. And I suppose from there I've never quite left some involvement within the federation. I went on to do things around safeguarding, anti-doping, led on governance, was appointed onto the board, and then spent 11 years as deputy chairman of British Rowing. So I took over as chairman about 2.5 years ago.
And the job of chairman involves doing what on a week-by-week basis?
All sorts of exciting things. Basically, I chair the board. I line manage the chief executive. I try and lead the organisation through the decisions the board makes into in the right direction, in the direction that I hope that the members and certainly the council would like. And I chair the council meetings too. So we have a regionally based council. And they appoint about half of the board, and about half of the board are appointed independently. And I represent the sport, try and represent the athletes, and then we have an international sort of side too, which I'm involved with, and effectively become the president on an international basis, representing British rowing.
Fabulous. So, if I was to ask you what the role of a rowing federation is, what does it have to do as an organisation?
Okay, well, putting aside the international side of it and the selection of the team, the governing body for the sport really tries to produce a coherent strategy for the sport. So that involves liaising with the clubs and the events, trying to make sure that we provide whatever the members need to be able to row and to help them, provide a structure for competition that provides fairness, and we also manage quite a large range of other stakeholders, so all our funding bodies, Sport England and UK Sport, Sport and Recreation Alliance, you know, anything else that's sort of on a national scale. And then below the sort of central governing body, there are 10 regions, and the regions all have their own council that manage their own competitions and events within that region.
So you can't run a regatta without it being on the competitions list, is that right?
You can, although it's not recommended. We'd rather it was. I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about the competition review later on, but we have been trying to deregulate some of the smaller competitions, and there are events, particularly for recreational rowing, small leagues around the country, which are not officially part of the competition structure, but are very much part of the way we want to go.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for that really good summary. So, since you've been chairman, you've been in the job around 2.5 years. What changes have been coming about? And I recognise that some of those changes won't be visible to the average member, but you'll know about them.
Well, we've had quite a big governance review, which was quite time-consuming. We've changed the composition of our board, and we're trying to move towards a much more sort of corporate board. So rather than an executive committee of volunteers, it's a board that takes full responsibility as directors for the running of the organisation, because it's a huge business now. You know, we're a big business with a £10 million turnover, and we need to have a governance structure and accountability that matches that. We've introduced new finance and audit and risk committees, so changed the composition of those. Brought on some more independent directors. We've moved from, I think, 2 out of 13 women on the board to 4 out of 12 women on the board, so we're ahead of our targets for our funding bodies of being 33% female. What else have we done? Less visible things. A consultation we've had throughout the sport to try and feed into our strategic review, and then use that to try and modernise the organisation a bit. So we've got a new chief executive who's come in, and we're putting in a much wider senior management team around him to help him deliver against the objectives that the sport have asked for.
I say the sport have asked for objectives. Give us a quick summary of the top 3. When we did the consultation, what we did was we said, what do we want the sport to look like in 5 to 10 years' time? Do we want to be a high-performing, growing sport? To which the answer was obviously yes. Nobody was going to say no. And then we asked the clubs and the individuals and the events, what are the things that are going to stop us being that high-performing governing body, and how do we address them? And the things that they want fell into sort of fairly broad themes. And the obvious one is we'd like to be a growing sport. We would like to be open to everyone. We'd like to be more accessible to people from across all social groups. We would like to be more coordinated as a team, and we need to look for financial sustainability, both for our organisation but also down at all levels through the sport. So one of the things that's quite important to us at the moment is ensuring that our clubs and events can be financially sustainable. What does coordinated as a team mean?
I think that's about everybody buying into the plan and the vision about those objectives. So, you know, if we're going to be high performing, we need everyone to work together. From an organisational perspective, that means we are working across the organisation rather than working as the international team and the national team or the national office. You know, we have a single finance resource and a single comms team, things like that. And I think if we then look at the bigger picture, it's about how do we use the benefits from our successful GB rowing team to help drive growth and drive sustainability at club level.
Great. So from a club committee point of view, they have to try and fit into that big plan, but what sort of local flexibility do they have to pursue their own aims and objectives? Because different clubs are very, very different bodies.
Sure. I mean, nobody has to buy into any plan, actually. It's very much up to the individual club. Our job is to provide the tools they might need and the advice and guidance to help them grow if that's what they want to do. There are some clubs that are very happy to be the size they are. Obviously, you know, then we have a couple of hundred school clubs which have a very different remit and objectives too, and university clubs. So, you know, it's really about if we do want to grow as a sport, if we do want to strengthen as a sport, we need to change because things are changing around us. And our job is to try and help those clubs that need and want support to do that.
So what are the changes you see?
In the wider environment?
Yes. You said things are changing around us.
Well, I think there's a lot more competition from other sports. I think people are wanting to consume their sport in a different way. They don't have the time necessarily with work pressures to be down at the rowing club every morning and every evening training for hours and hours on end. People want to be able to drop in and do some exercise and leave again, and that's really challenging for a sport like rowing. I think people talk about the fact that there are less senior club rowers in the UK. I think they probably are less, but there are increasing numbers of masters, for example, rowing. So how do we help our clubs to maximise the benefit they might get from the people that are there and available? How do we get the clubs to be able to open up from 9 to 5 when there are other people available who might want to use the club? And just to think a bit differently about how they might run themselves and how they might be accessible to people.
And what sort of things have you put in place around that accessibility you've just described and encouraging people to come in 9 to 5?
Well, we're working with a number of partners. So London Youth Rowing do quite a lot of work in the East End of London with a lot of the state schools, so to bring in different groups of juniors during the school day. In Birmingham, we have a partner called Birmingham Row, who are doing a similar sort of thing. And really, our role is just to help highlight the good work that are being done in various clubs. So if we can use someone like Tideway Scullers as a good example of having, ladies who come in and go out for a paddle twice a week, late mornings, when the first initial rush is over, sit down, have coffee, have a nice chat and go off. Those sorts of good practice we can share with other clubs around the country. And encourage them to do similar things.
So how do you share that good practice? Is this advice notes that get sent out on email? Is it in the magazine? How do people tap into these things?
Magazines, websites, and we have a regional structure of staff as well. So there are staff across the regions who share experiences and will go around and sort of help support people. Sorry, Rebecca.
First, the club has to ask the question. What help?
Not necessarily. I mean, we also share it at things like club conferences. We have a big whole sport conference every 2 years. I think we're a bit more proactive than waiting for people to ask. The regional staff will go out and sort of talk to people about what their needs are and what their aspirations are for their club. So we'll try and be proactive about it, because we need the sport to grow as well. If we stay the size we are, we'll become less and less relevant to sort of the sporting world in the UK.
How big is British Rowing at the moment in terms of membership and participation?
We've got about 30,000 members, individual members, 550 clubs across the country, and Sport England estimate that there are around about 75,000 people who are rowing once a week. And then on top of that, there are also a number of people who just do a bit of indoor rowing in the gyms as well. So there's quite a lot of indoor rowing, and we also cover indoor rowing.
So this, you've mentioned already, the competition structure is being reviewed, and tell us what has provoked you into feeling the need to review how competitions are run and organised, and how people win points and how they are graded.
Okay, well, it's first of all, it's not just about points. One of the things that came up during our consultation after London 2012 was that there was amongst the rowers, there was a great deal of dissatisfaction about the way they competed. A lot of people said that they felt they would like to compete more. They felt that it was expensive. They were disappointed often to travel a huge long distance and be knocked out in the first round, first thing in the morning. And there were other people saying that there wasn't enough competition of the right level for them, so the more elite rowers didn't have enough competition. The people at the lower end, at sort of more novice end, said there were so many people that they never won a race. So there was all sorts of things going on, and a real general feeling of dissatisfaction. So we decided that it was something as part of the the review that actually we needed to look at separately. And we also, when we'd been working on this for quite a number of years, when we analysed the point system we had a huge blockage. We had an enormous number of people who are novices and perhaps 1 or 2 years at Senior 4, Senior 3 level, and really very, very few people at elite level. The numbers of women at elite level, for example, were in about 60 or so, really tiny numbers. So that if you've only got 60 or 70 people, you're never going to get a decent Big Eights race at elite level. The other thing is that we had an awful lot of people turning up to trial at our national trials who were novices. I mean, something like 30% of the trialists turning up were novices. They'd never won a race. And one of the key things we need for progression and we need for our national team are people who have a really good racing mentality and who know what to do in a race under pressure. And if they've never won a race, then that's not good for eventually for the national team. So what we wanted to do was to provide more opportunities for people to have fun racing. We wanted to try and create a situation where people wanted to race more and they wanted to move up in a sort of progress, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say. We had a system where people preferred not to race in case they got points and therefore had to enter a more difficult race. And we wanted to try and reverse that round by making the winning more highly valued and trying to. So what we're trying to do is to twofold: create a system where people aspire to be further up the ladder and further up the ranking, and equally to make it easier for clubs to put on fun competitions for people who are not interested in progressing up that ladder.
So you're effectively dividing the sport. Tell us what the proposals are that you want to implement.
Well, I wouldn't say that we're trying not to divide it too much, but what we do want to do is to try and open up the sort of fun end of it. We want to be able to allow people to create more innovative competition, whatever that looks like. For example, up in the north, they have club leagues. They might be for juniors. They might be races around relay type races. They might be skills type competitions, all sorts of things. We just want to make it easier for people to have fun, and then to try and create a system that encourages people to race once they do decide they want to progress. So somewhere across the middle of their sort of rowing life, they might change from doing the fun racing to doing more serious races and longer distance races.
So just describe the structure that you're proposing for that race.
Well, all we're doing is we're putting in, rather than giving people points, we're putting in a system where they will be ranked. So very much like in other sports, like in tennis, depending on how well you do in every competition, you will get some ranking points, and you'll rank people. The most successful ones will be at the top, and the ones who either compete less or win at smaller regattas will be further down. So that the more important your race, a bit like if you win a Grand Slam, you go up to number 1, and if you're happy to stay down at number 114, that's fine. At the moment, all of that is still in discussion. The IT is still all being worked out. We're looking at how that will be weighted and things. So there's not much I can tell you, except that this sort of broad plan is that we'll have a similar ranking system to, say, for example, tennis or other sports.
And presumably you still want to encourage more people to register with you as members, because part of my rowing career was spent in a town with lots of rowing clubs, with a large number of people who did race locally in non-recognised events, were happy to only race locally and not travel in non-recognised events, and yet my perception was that they missed out on a lot of the benefits of membership because they weren't members of British Rowing. Is that still the case?
Well, one of the changes that we've made in modernising the executive team within British Rowing is that we've appointed a director of membership and rowing community. So for the first time, we've got somebody who's got direct accountability for our members and the clubs and events, and his job is to look at what the people participating in the sport want from British Rowing, and try and work out how we help them with that. So what we'd like to do is not to try and say we want them to register to be able to row. We'd like to move away from the fact that you have to have a rowing licence, particularly at the lower level. If you're at the fun level, there comes a point once you get onto the ranking system, for example, that we need to be able to track people and track where they're racing. So we would need people to register in some way. But I think there's a lot of work we could do to be more attractive for people to want to be part of. So rather than saying we're trying to force them to be members, we're trying to say what is it that they want from us.
So who is your director of membership?
New chap called Phil Hornsey.
Brilliant. Well, Mr. Hornsey, if Row Perfect can help you with your building of community, we'd love to help, because it sounds like there's a great opportunity, and what a fabulous way of creating a job that can really benefit the members. Going into more detail now about the higher end of club sport, we have a question from John in Oxford who says, how can the senior British Championships reflect the best of British clubs rather than what he calls a Leander Fest?
Well, I think that what it reflects at the moment is the fact that Leander is one of the top clubs in the country. Interestingly, this year at the British Championships, we had a much broader range of clubs winning. Largely, they tend to be universities who are at that top end and top level. And I think that we need to... I would be reluctant to put rules in around this, is what I'm saying, I think. We do need to look at it. But if Leander have got all the top athletes and are the best club in the country, then that's where it's going to be. What we need are to have more clubs, more Leanders. We need to help push up a few other clubs. And I'd like there to be one in, you know, a big club like a Leander type club from the north, and a big Leander type club from the east, and ideally at least one out in the west. And we could probably, with a number of rowers in the Thames Valley, you know, have Molesey up there challenging and Thames there challenging for some of those medals. So, you know, it doesn't have to be, but Leander do bring the biggest team. They brought 3 trailers, I think, to the last British Championships, and if you bring more athletes, you're going to win more medals.
Do you have a vision for the British Championships to be the pinnacle for all rowers who want to compete?
I think I'd like it to be a competition for those that want to be the very best. One of the reasons that we moved it to October, which isn't an ideal time for 2,000 metres, is so that we could have the very best athletes in the country compete in it. I think that we're still working through how that looks, but I think it's a fantastic event. And if you were to think that you could go along and see that number of Olympic and world champions and world medalists at an event in any other sport, you know, there should be people queuing up down the street to go and watch it and see it. So my vision is that we can, you know, make it a really exciting event. I'd like it to be an event that people really want to go and see. I'd love it to be an event that could be televised or live streamed. You know, it's a work in progress still, I think.
Have you ever considered including status racing and making it a week-long regatta so that everybody who wants to race is at the event and can feel the pride of being at the same regatta as their heroes from the Olympic team? At the moment, we've tried to minimise the number of events to try and get some really good competition in, rather than spreading people across too many boat types and events. So by having the
the system that we have with a time trial in the morning, and then semi-finals taken from that time trial ranking. We do have some status events. So, for example, there's an under-19 win, there's lightweights, there's club wins, there's university wins. So there are different types of things. We're trying to move away from the status, which is what people was dissuading people from racing during the season, because they were trying to keep their points down to keep in a lower status. So the idea of this this type of competition is just to be able to rank everybody in that way, a bit like in a triathlon where you end up with a ranking at the end of your competition, and you know whether you were the fastest male or female, and you know whether you're 39th overall or 304th overall. So it's just a different way of doing it, and you know, we all need to try different things, I think, and be a bit innovative.
Which is a very nice theme, because Stan Collingwood, who's from Newcastle upon Tyne, has observed to me that we're getting it right for the top 10% of our club athletes, so the sub-international level, but not for the rest. How can you improve that? Well,
I guess the question is, are we getting it right for the top 10% of our club athletes? And I actually don't know the answer to that. I don't know where that figure comes from. I think the idea of the competition review is to try and answer, you know, where we aren't getting it right. It is to be able to provide the sorts of competition that people have said they want, which is more races in the day, more fun races, more competition, and that takes not just the events to put those types of competition on. It takes the coaches to be able to take their athletes to them and let them race as many times as they like. So by providing opportunities for what we've called Pathfinder events this year, where people can go and compete in slightly off-piste type competition, and not gain points by doing that, I think we're beginning to look at how we might be able to help that sort of lower end of club competition.
Where can people find out about these Pathfinder events? And what
on the website. On the British Rowing website. If you go to www.britishrowing.org, and if you search in competition review, there are a number of pages. There's a really good section on frequently asked questions, FAQs. There's a section on Pathfinder events and the different sorts of events that we've had over the course of the last 2 summers. You know, I think hopefully that will help provide a bit of background and detail to where we've got to.
Fantastic. Right, we're just going to have a short message from our sponsor. Getting a special gift for the rower in your life for Christmas can be a real challenge, but Row Perfect's got your back. We've sent our little elves out to trawl the world in search of smart, cute, handy rowing gift suggestions for you. There's art for your walls, crafty tools for boats, coaching advice books and technique DVDs, jewellery, tea and coffee mugs, and witty t-shirts. If your budget stretches, the Coxmate GPS is fast becoming a bestseller for speed measurement in your boat. Get yourself a 5% discount on your whole shop. Sign up at rowperfect.co.uk/gifts. Go wild. Treat yourself at the same time. That 5% discount coupon can only be used once. Now, back with Annamarie Phelps. We've talked a little bit about different types of rowing and different types of rowing events. You've said that you're keen to grow the participation rate. How can ordinary clubs, ordinary members help British Rowing achieve this objective?
Well, they're the only people that can help us actually achieve this objective. If the clubs don't want to grow, then you know they will shut their doors and say they've got enough. I think the way that they can help is by by looking at alternative ways of bringing people in. So the Tideway Scullers example, for example, is very good. The leagues that they do in the evenings up in the north are very good. And really just speak to the British rowing staff in their region about how we can try and find ways to help them facilitate it. But really the sport is delivered by the clubs and delivered by our volunteers. So in the next cycle of funding, they are going to be really important, and we're going to be looking at how we can support them to deliver better numbers, see if there are ways for them to become more sustainable and to grow. But we can't do it without them at all.
What is the next cycle of funding? Is this funding for the governing body or funding for individual clubs?
No, in the UK we're funded on a 4-year cycle. So at about the same time as the Olympic cycle, we apply for funding from Sport England for programmes that will help deliver things around what the government would like. Usually they're about health, inclusion, participation, those sorts of areas. So when we start to look at that, we'll be looking at what is it that we need as a sport to help us to deliver the sorts of things that match. You know, we want to grow as a sport. How can we find within the Sport England grant system access to money to help support our clubs to grow?
Certainly one thing I've noticed over the years is you've been extremely successful in being early applicants for new pots of funding and have a reputation for leading other sports when it comes to innovation in that regard.
I hope so, yes, and I hope that our new sort of structure with Phil in place, looking at that, and we'll put in place a pathways manager to look at coach education and volunteer development, and those sorts of areas are the areas where we can make a real difference. But we can't deliver rowing, from where we are. It's really got to be the clubs and the volunteers who want to do it. So we want to encourage them to get their waiting lists down and get people out on the water.
How long are waiting lists?
They vary from place to place, but quite a lot of the clubs struggle to have enough volunteers and coaches.
So that kind of begs the question as to why rowing continues as a principally volunteer-led sport when other sports have paid coaches. I'm recently personally trying ocean swimming, and I've been taking lessons because I'm not very good at technically swimming. I can swim, but not very well. And it was noticeable that in looking at the local organisation of swimming for women, that paying is considered to be absolutely normal. Mm-hmm. How can rowing break out of this volunteer-led culture so that there is a greater incentive other than just donating your time and expertise for free?
Gosh, it's a big cultural change. I think we've started to some extent. We have a number of learn to row programs that people come on when they first start in the sport, that we began after Beijing and then again after 2012. But we just don't have the culture within our clubs to charge for people for coaching. In any other sport, I completely agree with you. If you go down to the local tennis club, you pay your joining fee and then you pay your monthly fee. And if you want a professional to coach you, you pay for your session for that. We don't have that, and I think in some ways that's a huge positive for our sport. That actually it makes it much more accessible for people from all backgrounds and all incomes to be able to join. But our clubs do need to be they need to be good business models. They need to look at how they can make themselves financially sustainable, and it may be that charging for coaching sessions and private coaching sessions is one way of bringing in revenue and income.
certainly in my own personal experience, I've found different clubs have different ideas, but that ideas do not flow easily from one club to the next. So when I was a member at Marlow Rowing Club, we had a membership category that was called a bar membership, and it was targeted at the parents of juniors to encourage them to come down at the weekend, go into the bar, have a drink, not necessarily alcoholic, watch the rowing from the comfort of the warmth of the bar, enjoy a social gathering, and we recruited a goodly amount of money in 10, 20, 40 pound increments from parents who were quite happy to support their child. They knew they had to come to the rowing club in order to collect them and drive them wherever they home afterwards. And that was a very, very nice way of making a friendly community atmosphere. Another club that I'm involved with here has a Friday night open drinks at the club. And in fact, the club members bring their own drinks, but they all sit down in the club room and just have a chat. And it's just a friendly occasion for community building. At that chat, of course, the opportunity to discuss what's coming up and when volunteers are needed for things is discussed, and it enables them to bypass the need to have people respond on email. Have you seen other innovations like that?
I mean, there are certainly lots of clubs that have really good social scenes. I was at Poplar Boat Club recently, and they had a fantastic club event, just club rowing in scratch crews, hired a boat to take people out to watch on the river, and then came back and had a fantastic big lunch. The clubs vary. They vary depending on the part of the country they're in, the sorts of people that participate. But they are all trying. But they equally, there's a huge pressure on the volunteers and the coaches, and on the equipment within rowing clubs. Because everybody traditionally goes out at the same time, and so they all want to be in the boat at the same time. So we do need to be innovative about how we coach and when we coach people and how we use our facilities. And those are sorts of things that we try and get the staff around the country to help share across different clubs.
You're certainly right about the pressure on equipment. When I helped out with a junior program, we had groups that rowed at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9:30, 11, 1:30 and 2:30, and the length of time reflected the fact that some of them were quite young, and that although an hour was there, they perhaps were only on the water for 40 minutes. But effectively, the boat stayed on the water and the athletes swapped. And
it's a long morning for the coaches, though. You're asking a lot of your volunteer coaches.
Each coach only coached one or two groups. Okay. So, and the way that we helped to grow the coaching base was to approach the local university and ask students if they would like some more money, which students usually say yes to. And so the later morning and early afternoon sessions, we paid to put the student coaches through the level 2 coaching program, and then their commitment back to us was 1 season's coaching, which was paid at an hourly rate. And so they could do their own rowing training in the morning, and if they needed to be free by midday or 12:30, and then they came and coached in the afternoon with us. And we found that that was beneficial on so many levels. Now, you mentioned volunteers, and I appreciate that volunteer management is actually a management science in itself. I read a comment online from someone who has said this: as with a lot of sports crying out for more volunteers, I think we need to seriously consider how open we are to people from outside the sport or the club. Managing a sport volunteer scheme, it never ceases to amaze me how often I have pleas for volunteers, but when I ask some simple volunteer management questions like who will be there to welcome them, the club goes into meltdown. How welcoming are we as a sport? How clear are we on what skills we need from volunteers and what roles we actually need them to do?
Can you answer that? Well, again, I think there are some clubs that do it brilliantly throughout the country. I'm just trying to think. Chester have done a really good job. It depends on the leadership within the clubs. It depends on whether clubs have got people who are available in the daytime when people might be wandering down past the rowing clubs. But we can always improve that aspect of it. And there are great volunteer organisations these days that can help support volunteer training as well. There's Join In, and there's a Sport England website called Club Matters that helps with these sorts of advice and training for people. So, it's something we just need to keep working on, really. And I think not be scared to bring, as you say, not be scared to bring in people from outside the sport. Not be scared to ask people to move on and not just accumulate jobs. We have a few people who do an awful lot of jobs in clubs, and actually we need to share around some of those jobs so that everybody does a little bit sometimes.
One of the best tasks we ever did to break down barriers and encourage that sharing of jobs was at a club which had about 4 different training groups: men, women, juniors, masters. And we introduced a roster for serving the tea and toast on a Saturday and Sunday morning in between sessions. And each group had to man, effectively, the kitchen in turn. And it meant that every single club member pretty much got to talk to every single other club member at least once every 8 weeks. Even if your conversation went, hello, 1 cup of tea and 3 slices of toast, it enabled everybody to know everybody else, and that then made it easier to ask supplementary questions such as, would you also volunteer for something else? Moving on to looking at how the national rowing team, international rowing team, works within British rowing, do the membership fees of the ordinary members subsidise your international team?
Not a penny.
So how does that funding work?
The international team are funded from UK sport money, and then we have a small number of partners and suppliers and sponsors who help supplement that.
So what does the membership fee, when one becomes a member of British Rowing and acquires a racing licence, what does that pay for?
That helps pay for the development of the coach education materials. It pays for insurance for those members, helps pay for the communications, the production of the magazine, some administration around the calendar, the other committees and things that run the sport, as it were, the sport side of it, things like that.
So all of your headquarters staff are not being paid for out of membership subscriptions?
No, there's the UK sport money also helps pay for some core costs. So we have core costs that come from both Sport England and UK Sport to help with the staff in there. And then some of the membership costs obviously do come from that.
So what proportion are we talking about here? Is membership paying for 50% of the headquarters? 2%?
No, I don't think so at all. I think the membership money coming in is only something like 5% overall of all of our income. So, it is quite a small percentage, and the vast percentage of that membership goes on insurance, communications, magazine, and things that go straight back as benefits to those individual members.
That's great. So your ability to tap national funding sources is what's paying for the growth in staff regionally and at headquarters.
Yes, well, it's not growing. It stayed fairly stable, but yes.
Many rowing clubs report that they've got healthy membership headcount in juniors and masters, but very few club men and women. Have you got any suggestions as to how this can be improved?
Well, if you want my personal opinion, I think we ask an awful lot of our club rowers to be training quite often 6 times a week around their working lives. I don't think this is a new problem. I've got a book that was published in 1910 that complains about exactly the same thing, about the pressures on then mostly gentlemen, and their city lives, and how difficult it was for them to fit in their training around their work. And I think that people's working lives are even more pressured now. So I think we need to seriously think about how we help people who want to stay in the sport to train around their other commitments and their other family commitments.
Do you have any specific suggestions how that can be managed?
I think just allowing people to do ergos in their gym near their place of work, perhaps, not always having to be at the boathouse, maybe cutting out a session or two, being a bit more flexible. Perhaps we don't need to go out in crew boats quite as often as we do throughout the winter, so letting people have a bit more time off. I'm not a coach, so I can't possibly comment on which particular bits of their programme they should change, but I'm sure that there is some flexibility and some sort of change we can do to make it easier for people to stay in the sport and have some sort of work and life and family balance.
Going back to regattas and events, one of the conversations that I was privy to online was talking about a big shortfall in umpires and race organisers. And obviously your earlier comments about changing the competition structure and so on implies that there will be more events and also a greater diversity of events. How do you think we should recruit to fill this shortfall on the organisation side of the sport?
Well, we definitely do have a shortfall. We still have, I think, about almost exactly the same number of umpires that we had about 15 years ago, but we have about 50% more events and about 100% more athletes and rowers taking part. So there is no doubt that there is pressure on that umpiring community. One of the things that we are looking at and talking about is going out to the students through our young people's panel to see if we can encourage some younger people to umpire. Another possibility that has been discussed, I can't say it will be agreed, but is to have a sort of interim umpire bit. So rather than being a fully qualified umpire, we could have some events where you have people that are timekeepers rather than umpires, trained as timekeepers or trained in different roles. So we don't have to have full umpires for every role in every event. And I'm sure that might help alleviate a bit of the pressure. But it's something that's definitely being looked at.
Going on to looking at different event formats, we went to a regatta recently where, in the same way that you described the British Championships of having a time trial followed by semi-finals, they did exactly the same thing, but they didn't restrict it by boat class. So you ended up with semi-finals with boats of similar speed, but men and women, small boats and big boats, all in the same races. Do you think that's a format, and are there other formats that have been put forward to try?
Well, I think events can do whatever format they like. I mean, if you think about a head race, if, for example, the fours head or the pairs head, we've got double sculls racing against pairs. We've got quads racing against coxed fours, racing against coxless fours. So there's no reason why you couldn't have eights or octuples racing against other boat types as well. And just because one is a time trial and one is a six-lane side-by-side race, if they are of similar speed, then all you're doing is you're providing them with a much more competitive environment in which to race. So I'm open to anything.
So I had a look online and I was looking at different structures that other sports have incorporated, and skiing is a sport that has developed massively in recent years, so snowboarding and various different styles of what perhaps one would call technique and skills rather than necessarily speed downhill in a straight line. Cycling, of course, has I found the Omnium, which looks fantastic. An opportunity to try lots of different racing formats in a team as well as individually. And of course, cycling also has the wonderful variations on the track cycling as well as road, mountain biking and downhill. Do you think that rowing has the opportunity to do this and then to codify it internationally to make non-2,000 metre races possible?
Well, I think quite a lot of non-2,000 metre racing already happens. We have some great examples of coastal rowing in different ways, longshore coastal rowing and then going out and round buoys. There's a fantastic new format called beach sprints at the coasts, where you run from the start line down, jump into the boat and go off and race around and come back and sprint the last bit back up the beach. We actually run, and I think somebody else does a similar version of a sculling festival, which is a skills-based. So you do a short distance sprint, a longer race, you do some skills, you weave in and out of the buoys in your single, and you have points for each of these events that add up to a total for the winner. There's the ordinary sprint racing. At the Commonwealths we have 500 metre and 1500 metre racing, for example, on a team format. So there are already a lot of different racing formats out there. Two boats side by side on a short bit of river versus 6 lanes, 2,000 metres is quite a difference. So I think they're there. Internationally codifying it, well, the coastals are already international. The coastal beach sprints are already international. The Commonwealths and the Youth Olympic Games provides another sort of format, which is a 500 metre, between 4 and 500 metre actually sprint racing on a team format in small boats. So I think there's plenty out there. It's really, we do have a slight obsession with 2,000 metre 6-lane racing for some reason.
It is very limiting. It's hard to find places where you can actually run that particular precise format, particularly when a lot of the world does not have large lakes and straight rivers.
And most of the rowing competition around the world is not on 6-lane 2,000 metre races. So I think it's there. We just need people to enjoy it and value it for what it is, and see it as being a fun part of participating in the sport. So
you mentioned you mentioned coastal rowing there, but is gig rowing, surf boat rowing, are they now part of British rowing's responsibility and zone of influence?
No, they're not part of us. They have separate organisations that codify their rules and their racing. And a lot of the coastal boats actually are very local organisations, because the boat varies depending on the history of that particular area and, as I understand it, the wave type and the way that they use the boats historically. But there are a large number or increasing number of clubs that are either fixed seat clubs or coastal clubs that do belong to British Rowing, are affiliated to us, and we provide coach education for them and insurance for them, and help them apply for grants if that's what they're looking to do.
That's very interesting. I received a question on Row Perfect recently from a reader who said, where can I find coach advice on how to drill people for fixed seat rowing? Do you specifically have that information? Where could I find it on your website?
I think it should be under coach education, but if not, I would pick up the phone to somebody in British Rowing and ask to speak to the education and training department.
And is that coach education a public part of the website, or does one have to be a member?
Well, you wouldn't find the actual course on the open website, but there'll be information about how to contact somebody about it.
Fantastic. Thank you. Now, Martin, who actually is a gentleman of both of our acquaintance, so I won't give his surname, put a comment online that said, Masters rowing is a totally selfish pursuit that adds unnecessary events and prevents participants putting anything back into the sport. Do you have an opinion on his point of view there?
I know lots of Masters rowers who also umpire or sit on committees or run events. There is a perception amongst some people that it prevents people from participating. My personal view is that actually it keeps an awful lot more people in the sport and keeps an awful lot more people healthy. So I wouldn't like to see its demise at all. I think it's fantastic that we have so many masters rowers around the world competing and racing and training, and also then participating and helping to run their clubs.
One of the challenges for masters rowers is that if you begin learning to row in your 40s, your 50s, your 60s, how can you get to a point of competition where the racing is fair against someone like you, who've been to the Olympic Games and learned to row and has a much greater depth of experience in a number of years competing? I know that you have novice masters and I think IM4 masters events. Does your competition review have any reflection of removing the age gap and the experience gap for masters races?
Well, we're only just about to embark on the test year for the new review, but what I hope it will do is provide us again with a ranking, so actually age becomes irrelevant. If you're racing against people that you're close to in ranking, it shouldn't matter whether they are 16 or 60. If you want to then race in your age group, you can choose to do a masters race, but if you want to race in a mainstream race against people of a similar speed to you for that competition, then you can enter in based on the ranking points that you've got under the new structure.
Fabulous. Is there anywhere that a regatta organiser can go to look to find out the relative boat speeds? Because I know that I personally happen to know that a man's single scull can be an equivalent speed to a women's double scull, for example. And I was saying to you earlier that I got entered as a master's crew in a race against under 17 girls, and we were reasonably well matched there. Where could a regatta organiser go to find that sort of information when they're considering what events to put forward and how to make close races?
I don't know at the moment that we do have that. I mean, that's part of the next year's testing of the systems and seeing where people sit. But I think the aim is, I mean, hopefully once we've done some testing, we'll be able to see how people rank next to each other, and then as a byproduct of that, it should be possible to look at where crews finish and what the composition of those crews is. But that's a lot of statistical analysis, and it'll depend on, it'll be as good as the information that goes into it. So we'll be reliant on the events to feed back results and to feed back on those sorts of speeds.
Great stuff. Well, I hope it goes really, really well. One last question. Of course, the news today has broken that rowing has some drug takers in the sport. Have you been asked to give an opinion about this particular incident?
On a personal level, no. I mean, I think, as an organisation, we're clearly really disappointed. We strongly feel that we are part of the fight against doping at all levels of our sport. I feel that, my gut feeling is that we're a very clean sport and we're very good in this country at educating people. And I think it's really unfortunate that we've found ourselves in this situation. And I only hope that it serves as a wake-up call to people to think very carefully and not to make choices that might endanger their sporting careers when they're young.
So the incident was actually, I'm guessing, back in April or May of this year, and presumably it's been bubbling along for quite a while.
Yes, through various processes. I mean, it's just, it is not a nice process to go through if you have a positive test. It's a long process, and we are where we are. It's really unfortunate and really disappointing.
Annamarie, thank you very much for your time. I have learned a heap. I wish you all the best with particularly the competition review. And for clubs, please direct yourselves to the British Rowing website. There is a heap of stuff there. There are experienced people there ready and willing to help. This has been Rowing Chat. If you are interested in listening to further rowing chats, you can find them online at rowperfect.co.uk/rowing chat, or subscribe to our feed in iTunes. Please leave us a review if you have enjoyed this and share the link with your friends. We're always looking for ideas for new interviewees and to broaden the community base. Till next time, bye-bye.